Hello and welcome to the Brave Business Podcast, brought to you by the accounting, tax, audit and advisory firm Blick Rothenberg. Brave by name and brave by nature, this series is different. Aimed at entrepreneurial businesses, we focus on providing market updates, practical guidance, timely insights, and professional opinions from industry experts, helping you make informed decisions for your business. I'm Declan Curry, journalist and broadcaster. This is the second of two episodes that focus on the key considerations for an owner-managed business during its life cycle, from startup through to maturity and finally sale and succession. In part two, today we'll focus on the growth and sale of a business. Joining me to share their insights and their expertise from Blick Rothenberg, it's corporate tax partner Rob Goodley and audit partner Darsh Shah. And we're also joined by David Rai, co-founder of Sparta Global. Welcome all of you to the discussion. David, just tell us, what is Sparta Global?
Sparta Global is a technology services and education company. What the company does is really address the gap in technology skills in the UK, whereby we train graduates through our own academies across the UK in key skills that are in high demand within tech. And then we actually deploy the Spartans, as we call them, once they're trained, to work with our client base in government, commercial and large financial services organisations. The company's around 1,000 people and has grown since we founded the company in 2015.
Okay, thank you. You're going to help us understand what it takes to grow a business and then how you sell it on and how you think about exit strategies as well. And we'll hear more from you in just a moment. But Rob, I'm going to start the discussion with you. So you're advising an entrepreneur. They've started up the business. It's up and running. It's growing. Then what? What are the next stages they need to think about?
So I think once the business is established, there's kind of three things that I try to get my clients to think about. So the first one is to try and lift your eyes to the horizon. So in that startup phase, it can obviously be quite fraught. You're just trying to keep the business alive and establish it. But once it's there, I think you need to start thinking about what the end goal is. So is it to sell the business? Is it to keep it in the family and bring a son or daughter in? Or is it just to continue on, as kind of a lifestyle business? I think once you start asking those sort of questions, you can then, make decisions with that end goal in mind and get there incrementally. And it just helps that whole decision-making process.
When do you have to make those decisions? Does that have to be clear in your mind from the very, very early days of the business, or can you make it up as you go along?
I don't think it has to be clear from the start personally, because I think often it's just a passion or it's a gap in the market that someone looks to exploit. And you kind of need to get through that. Does this exist? Is it a real business? Can I make a success of it? Before you then think, okay, I've got something. What am I going to do with it? So I think there's no set point when it comes. But I think, once you've established the business, I think that's a question you should start to ask yourself.
And obviously circumstances change and you might have to change your thinking alongside it.
Of course, yeah.
Okay, so what's next?
So I think the second thing is to think about the team you've got, the people around you. And there's kind of two elements to that. So firstly, who have you got in the business? So naturally, in the startup phase, there's a lot of key man risk. But I think as you start to establish, you need to kind of think, well, how do I make this business more robust? What don't I know that I can bring people into the business to help me with? And then the second element is kind of the external kind of advisors. So as you grow, what you need and what the business needs in terms of advice evolves. It always makes good sense to see what extra advisors you might need to complement what you've already got, to make sure you're making the right decisions at the right time. And then lastly is kind of risk and compliance. So what is a risk in your business and how are you managing it? Because if you don't get hold of those as the business establishes, you can have, some quite significant problems down the line.
And I'll bring Darsh in on that in just a moment. But the broad theme that struck me there was that as the business grows, it becomes more complex. And you as the founder, the owner, you're not going to have all the answers.
No, absolutely not. And also the advisors you started out with at the beginning might not have all the answers either. And I think the real danger is, what you don't know, what questions you should be asking. If you just increase the pool of people that you're looking at to help you with those, you'll get a better answer.
Darsh, talk to me a little about compliance. Talk to me as well about the exit strategy. As an entrepreneur, as an owner, you tend to spend all your time thinking about growing the business and running the business, but you need to have in your mind some idea of how and when you get out of the business.
Yeah, there are situations or circumstances where there might be succession planning where exit is not an option because you got either a family business or management are ready to take over and you still an MBO. But there are occasions where you want to plan for an exit. And normally I think you should look at least 2 years ahead. And I know it sounds a long time, but actually it isn't. Once a business is properly established and, it's a serious business that's now considering offers, I would say you need a very robust internal management team to take you to the next journey, because the whole regime of going through a due diligence, the getting ready for a sale, surrounding yourself with external advisors, I think you also need a very strong internal team that can cope with those demands, as well as for the management to continue running the business. And as Rob mentioned earlier, the advisors that you would have started with at the start of the business may not have all the answers, and that's the point that perhaps you need to start looking at the external team as well.
David, thinking about how your business has grown and how it's developed over the years, how much of that is an echo of your experience?
Yeah, I think there's definitely some points that resonate with me. I think when we first started the business, as Rob mentioned, I was wearing a lot of hats, doing everything in the company, from marketing, HR, finance, even doing the P&L and balance sheet, which I'd learned about, literally 2 months before starting the business. So, there was a time where I was having to spin a lot of plates. But as the business grew and professionalized, I started to bring in more senior managers within each of those areas to manage those departments, really, to bring in some more rigor into the organization, as well as, improving the level and quality of advisors that we were using, right from legal, accountancy. So, yeah, a lot of those points do resonate with me.
What was the point when you realized that you weren't a small entrepreneurial company anymore, that you were a decent size growing business? Is there a mindset change?
Yeah, definitely. I think the first stage is where you start to hire individuals or see people in the office and you don't know their name. That's where it goes beyond that 100 people in the organisation. We had a very rapid growth story from when we grew Sparta Global in 2015. We grew to around 150 people in the space of 2 years. So you can imagine it was very difficult to know everybody. In the early days, you'd go to the pub on a Friday, you knew everyone's personal story, the name of their girlfriend, boyfriend, wife, dog. But as it gets bigger, it gets very, very difficult to know everyone, although you want to. It does really change the shape of the company.
That changes your role as the leader of the organisation as well. You're no longer you're not the head of the family anymore.
Yeah, that's right. I think it's that sort of classic working in the business and working on the business. I think for the first year, I was very much working in the business, looking at each area, micromanaging every element of the business. But as the business grew, I had to really extract myself from that and look at the long-term vision, strategy, and the goals, really, and the overall growth story. And that's where there was a real shift in how I was managing the business.
Rob, I imagine that for many business leaders, that's the first of the teething troubles of growth, that recognition that they're not running the business like a family anymore.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think some businesses stop there. That their growth story stops because the founder's not willing or able to evolve their role. But I mean, as David says, if you can, it can unlock so much potential. Just recognizing that you need other people to complement your skill set. Recognizing, as David said, that actually the value he was bringing to the business was, the overall strategy and direction. There were other people that could do his internal roles probably better than he could. So having that recognition can then take the business to the next level.
Is it an emotional time? Is it an emotional wrench when you realize that you can't do it all?
Oh, definitely. I think in the early days, you get used to doing every single role. So when you start delegating, you have a period where you're micromanaging and really irritating the people that you've hired. And it's at the point where they tell you, look, just leave me to it, that you realise that people can do a better job, really. And that's the stage I probably reached around 3 or 4 years ago, really. Just letting people get on with their jobs is the best way of managing.
That your baby's all grown up and doesn't quite need as much.
It's still your baby, and when things go wrong, you get drawn into these issues and firefighting, as ultimately, as a CEO, you've got to make the difficult decisions.
Talk about how you build the team that you then need. So you're bringing all these people with expertise in from outside. You may or may not know them. You'll certainly have done your sort of diligence on their track record. Is there a trust issue? This whole point again about letting go trusting other people to do the roles that you used to do. Talk me through that.
Yeah, I think it was an evolution, really. So in the early phase, I was really responsible for all the selling in the organisation. And when we were a startup, at the start, it was difficult to get good people. So we had a phase at the start where we had a novel idea of hiring actors to do the selling, which probably wasn't the best approach because they're often going to the auditions or working on EastEnders in the afternoon. But they were great on the phone. But I realised I had to change the hiring policy at that point and bring in more professional salespeople. So it was an evolution of realising that not to just bringing people in because they're cheap, because I think when you're a startup, you're trying to save costs, but hiring the right individuals on the right salary. So, it was hiring people on maybe more a higher salary so they could actually do the job in the right way, really.
Rob, what are the tips for building a team and avoiding mistakes? Because mistakes will be made, but they can be difficult and complex to unwind.
I think that's right. I mean, this is a question that every business grapples with, right? So there's no fixed answers. But I think it's about recognizing amongst the management team you've got, recognizing where you've got gaps, and then, trying to make sure you're finding people who are really going to fit into those gaps. And then I think more than anything, it's about then culture. Is this going to be the right cultural fit? Are they going to fit with not only where the business is now, but where we want it to go? And I think if you get that cultural fit wrong, that can be where there's real problems.
What about financing? How do you secure the financing that you need to expand the business? I'm assuming that your need for finance grows as the business grows.
That's right. I mean, we had a rapid period of growth in the first 2 years where we grew the company from 0 to 150 people in 2017. At that point, we knew if we were going to continue to grow and open new offices in central London and the regions, we were going to need some outside capital, really. And at that point, my business partner and I had an option. Either we went down the banking route and had more debt in the company, which we didn't really favour, or go down the PE route and get some growth capital into the company from an external investor who could also add value in other areas outside of the capital itself. And it also provided an opportunity for us to de-risk an element of our shareholding. Because the biggest stress when you're running a company is the cash flow. That's what keeps you up at night. Especially when you're growing at a rapid rate, you're always worried about cash. And the first PE deal really gave us the option to maybe de-risk a bit and continue the growth story as well.
And this was your step. So you brought in private equity investors. You've done it twice, but let's talk about the first stage. First of all, did they come to you or did you go to them?
Because the company was growing so quickly, my business partner and I had a lot of conversations around the next chapter of what we were going to do in the organisation. And we were getting a lot of approaches from large corporate finance organisations and PE organisations. So at that point, I'd hired a non-exec director who had his own network within PE. He said, actually, you should start talking to private equity and see whether you want to do a transaction. So we started to meet different private equity houses in London and across the UK. Some of the PE houses we met really didn't understand our model, or there wasn't really a good rapport with the individuals we met. But when we did meet key capital partners who were our first PE backer, there was an instant rapport with the team. So we knew straight away the chemistry was right and they understood our culture and really our vision for the company. And I think that was the key focus for us, that rapport, as well as their ability to add value for the next part of our journey, really.
Darsh and Rob, just flesh this out a little. A couple of interesting sort of threads from that. One is that you need to, if you've had unsolicited offers or you're putting yourself out in the marketplace, you need to assess who you're dealing with and what they've got to offer, as well as your own business, and then finding people that you think are going to click, that get what the business is about.
No, I agree. And when David and I met after his first, before his first PE deal, and we assisted in that first transaction, I recall there were more no's than yes by him and his team and his advisors. Not necessarily because the consideration wasn't what they thought was worth looking at or not looking at. It was more to do with the fit, the cultural fit, and if they get the business. And I think also if they believe in the same story, and that's quite key, because it's not just about the first transaction, it's actually where does the business go from that. And I think that was very important for David and his business partner, that we come in now, we all grow this to where I needed to go next and beyond, and that's the vision they all had to share. So I think there's some offers you just do not look at because they're just poking, just exploring, maybe probably trying to get to know more of your business than you want them to know. But there's some that, if they've got a good reputation in the market, this is the right PE house that not just the reputation of the PE house, but the portfolio manager or the director is going to sit on the board, that we can have these kind of conversations and they believe in the story. And I think that was the challenge. And hence, coming back to my point right at the start, was this is the planning that you need to consider this in advance. It's not something you do after an offer has come in, but you start having those kind of conversations before you enter the market.
What happens if it's a surprise offer that you didn't think yourself, as the owner of the business, that it might be of interest to anyone else, or it was at the stage where outside finance could be attracted?
Well, it has to make sure that that ultimately they still get the business, because it could be an offer just for now, but I also know that for David and his partner, that a straight sale was never an option at that stage, because as far as he was concerned, as far as we were all concerned, this is just the beginning. So maybe those kind of offers would come in, but chances are how serious we should take them will all depend on whether they still want the business to grow to a stage where the founders believe that they can take the business to.
So, David, it's not just the money. At that stage, Darsh says you weren't interested in a straight sale. If someone had come along and put a enormous amount of money on the table, were there any circumstances where you would have said, yeah, take the business?
Yeah, that really wasn't of interest to us. We did have some approaches, some large corporates who were interested in doing an outright sale, but we felt that there was still so much potential in what we're doing. And the fact that, our company has a big social impact in helping youngsters from diverse groups and gender as well get into technology, we felt there's still a long way to go in terms of helping people, especially with the technology skills gap just growing more and more in the UK and globally. We didn't really want to sell the whole company, and we felt that the PE route was the best way to go, to still having the majority stake in that first deal to keep them pushing forward with some growth capital behind us as well.
So, Rob, there's got to be a click there between the investor and the company.
I think that's really important. And actually, we're in a stage now with the private equity industry in the UK where there's a lot of competition. There's a lot of private equity houses out there. So if you're, like David was, leading a growing company that's very attractive, you have the power to pick and choose. And, if you just go for the highest number, it could definitely be, a mistake. You're going to be having board meetings with these people. They're going to be very, very involved in your business from now on. So if you don't have that chemistry from the start, things can go downhill quite quickly.
Private equity investment sometimes goes in waves, though. There are often times when there's an awful lot of money sloshing around in the good times, and we seem to be in a period where things are getting tighter. Am I reading that right?
I think there's still a lot of private equity money around. It probably will get tighter, but as I always say to my clients, there is always competition for good assets. So if you're, like David was, a company with rapid growth and really good prospects, there will always be competition. And that means you can have the power to pick the best partner.
So, David, what happened then? You've had the investment, the first stage of investment. What's the relationship like with the investors? They bought a minority stake.
That's right. With the first deal with KCP, it was a minority. So once the deal was done, there wasn't much change in the way we were running the business. So we went back to the office. If anything, we were even more motivated to carry on with the journey after the PE deal. There were some changes at board level where PE do have representation on the board. So there were 2 partners from KCP on the board. But I found that to be a really good thing for us, really, because it challenged the management team to really push forward in terms of having some difficult questions outside the internal people in the organisation, really questioning what you're doing in terms of the direction of the company.
So like a fresh set of eyes.
That's right. And also really drawing on their experience in similar industries across their own portfolio, because most private equity firms have quite a big portfolio of other companies where they've invested. So you can learn from best practice around pricing, the commercial aspects as well from those other portfolio companies.
Because this will be another of those sticky points for some company owners. Rob mentioned earlier about those that grow it as a family business and don't want it to grow anymore because they don't want to give up any control to anyone. You're now at the point where you're bringing in outside money and outside expertise and people who have the ability to say to you, do it differently. They might not, but the option is there. And some entrepreneurs, some business owners might think, I don't want that. I don't want someone else looking over my shoulder telling me what to do.
I think as a business owner, a lot longer as you're confident about your business and the business is going in the right direction, I think PE is a great option. I wouldn't have done 2 PE transactions if I didn't feel it was the right thing to do. I think, there's a lot of bad press around PE as well. But as I said earlier, it's really around that rapport and chemistry. If that's not right from day one, it's not going to get any better once you've done the transaction, really.
And then the next stage, the second injection of private equity. Talk to us about the circumstances of that.
Yeah, so during the KCP's tenure as a private equity partner, the company again continued to grow rapidly, and we made some major changes and made good use of that growth capital, opening new offices in central London, a regional office in Birmingham. We brought in more senior individuals, a new CFO, operations people director, brought in a new IT system. So we did a lot of things with that, with the growth capital, and the company actually doubled its headcount again to around 350 people. Profit grew fourfold, and revenue grew by 10 million. So we had a really good period of growth during that period. Again, I started getting phone calls from larger private equity firms who have 7 billion under management rather than 350 million under management, large trade buyers, corporates. So at that point, we discussed it in the board meetings and maybe we should do a full process. So in January 2020, we were about to do a full process with lots of different private equity organisations.
By full process, you mean?
It's almost like a beauty parade of private equity firms and large corporates who make an offer for the business. And then COVID hit in March 2020. We put that to a halt. But then we had quite an interesting development during the second lockdown where Reflection Private Equity approached me to do a deal off the table. So I met one of the partners who I already knew, again, had a good relationship with. We met for a drink in a hotel, as with most good deals done over a glass of wine. I actually sort of stated what we wanted in terms of valuation, and the deal was completed 2 months after.
And the deal was what? I don't mean what are the financial terms. I mean, what was the consequence of the deal?
Yeah, we sold a majority stake this time rather than a minority stake.
And the previous investors, are they still involved at this stage?
No, they sold 100% of their shares to...
As part of the same arrangement?
That's right. And they made a great return. They made 7 times their money for their investors. So it was a great transaction for them.
Sure. So at the end of this, you've effectively swapped PE companies, and the second company is owning more of the business than before.
One benefit of doing the second transaction, it gives you some more equity to actually then pass on to the next layer of management in the organisation. So you can then pass that on to maybe the layer of management didn't benefit from the first PE deal.
Let's talk about the next chapter. David, I'll give you a moment just to have a little rest, because I don't want to, unless you're willing to tell us, what is your next chapter?
Yeah, so the company grew pretty rapidly to the point of the deal with Inflection, where we were around 350 people. Since the transaction with Inflection, we've grown to around 1,000 people within the organisation. So we've continued that rapid growth story. Now, looking at the next stage, really, we've created a value creation plan with Inflection to look at the next potential transaction, which could be an IPO, another PE sale, or a sale to a corporate. So that would probably happen in the next 2 to 5 years.
And Rob, just making this a more general point for all of the businesses that might be listening to us, they've grown the business, they've expanded the team, they've got in extra finance from whichever source they decide to choose. They reach a fork in the road, don't they? Or a junction in the road where the options are, well, what are they? You sell up completely, you pass it on to the next generation, or what?
I think effectively they're the two end games you're going to get to. So you will either completely sell down over time, which might be, for example, if David, the IPO, his shareholding might come down further, and then maybe, 10, 20, 30 years from now, he exits completely. Or like you say, if it's a family business, it might go down a number of generations. They're sort of the places you will end up in eventually, I think. Some people transition just to a management team and will always retain kind of a family shareholding, if you like, but completely separate themselves from the running of the business. But I'd say more often than not, you end up with kind of just a family business, or you've completely exited.
Is this a stage of life? Is this the type of thing that owners start thinking about when they hit 55, 60? Or is it something that should be in the planning long before?
Yeah, I think this comes to the point I made at the start about trying to lift your eyes to the horizon, because I think for a lot of people it does come later. They come to maybe that kind of age and think, what is my plan? What should I do? And oftentimes it's not the optimal time anymore. It's potentially too late. So I think ideally you have those thoughts and conversations early. I mean, this is especially true for succession. If you want to bring the next generation in, actually, in practical terms, there might be quite a small window to do that because there might be 30 years between the two generations. So I think you do need to, if you possibly can, plan for that as soon as you possibly can.
What if you don't like your kids or you think they're not going to be up to it?
Well, this is, we come across as advisors, we come across this situation a lot, and it's difficult. I think, the conversations you have with clients like that is, you're going to have to go down a sale route or a succession plan with a management team. And if you've got your children are really keen to be involved in the business, you're probably going to have that conversation, and it's going to be difficult.
It's often the third generation, isn't it, when the wheels start coming off the bike?
Definitely can. Yeah, I mean, I've seen this before where you end up with, the business being run by cousins rather than siblings, and it's not the same. It's not the same.
There could be a whole other podcast on family-run businesses with that regard. David, I'm going to ask you this, and I want you to pretend that Rob and Darsh aren't sitting beside us. How important is the quality of the advice?
I think it's very important. I think we found that in both transactions. In the first transaction, I don't think we had enough external advisors. I think most of it was being organised by our non-exec director. So we didn't hire a corporate finance house, which did kind of stretch the process out to 8 months for that first deal. With the second transaction, we weren't as naive to private equity transactions, so we did hire a corporate finance house, which was recommended by my chairman, which really allowed us then for them to handle all those negotiations, those hard negotiations for the transaction to be completed in 2 months. So I would say get the right advisors on board, a good quality legal firm as well as accountancy firm are essential in terms of having a quick transaction. Because it's important to have a quick transaction because then you're less distracted on the transaction rather than on the business. So you should really be focused on running the business.
What's the best advice you would pass on to an entrepreneur who's just at that stage? They've had the brilliant idea, they've got their business up and running, they're trading, hurrah. What's the advice for the next however many years of their journey?
I think what's very important is bringing in the right senior management team quickly. I think I didn't do that quick enough. Don't hire actors for your sales team. Maybe bring professional sales professionals in quicker is some good advice. And also to start looking at future capital requirements is very important, whether you're looking at bank debt or private equity. But I would recommend private equity because I think it's a really good option to allow the founders to de-risk while still owning the majority share of the company to continue with the overall growth plans that they have.
Why on earth did you hire actors?
I felt they, to be very eloquent on the phone, very confident. They could handle rejection, which they and they were amazing on the phone. The unfortunate thing was they were constantly auditioning for large movie parts, and I did have one chap who ended up in a large Marvel Hollywood blockbuster. I can't name his name, but he worked for me on the phones for a while, and a few were on EastEnders, Bill, and went on to do some very successful acting roles.
Do they invite you to the after parties?
Yeah, I went to a few premieres, so that was the benefit of having actors working for you. You got onto the red carpet a few times.
Here's a side piece of advice that that doesn't come through. Anyway, thank you all very much for sharing your expertise. Thank you, David, Darsh and Rob. If you'd like further insights around the owner-managed business lifecycle, you can visit Blick Rothenberg's Entrepreneurs Hub for further insights. That's www.blickrothenberg.com/entrepreneurs. I'm Declan Curry. This has been the Blick Rothenberg Brave Business Podcast. Thank you for being part of our conversation.